Hello, our friends, Evolutionary Energy Arts family.
Hello there, welcome back.
So, thinking the unthinkable.
Something that's very, very difficult to do because you kind of want to blind yourself when it comes to unthinkable things, which is understandable.
Exactly. And sometimes in history we could look and we could see precedents where people didn't want to really think about something that was going on because it was kind of unthinkable. It was something that would just boggle the mind or blow their sense of reality in thinking that this really can't be happening, can it?
It's a strong sense of protecting yourself from things that might be happening outside of your world, and people do it. And it's frighteningly very natural, actually, where people can't face certain things, but sometimes that puts other people in danger.
Absolutely. There's some things we don't want to think about. There's things we don't want to face. It is certainly important to keep our vibrations high. And, there are many in the, let's just say the Lightworker Starseed community that very understandably don't want to subject themselves to anything that could pull their frequency down. And that is for sure something to keep in mind. But at the same time, when there's something going on that is so diabolical, so impactful for humanity in general, it might do good for the individual, certainly, to unplug and get themselves as far away from society as possible. But then there's many individuals that their whole purpose is service to others and trying to uplift others. And most definitely, it's hard to uplift others from inside a small prison cell. How are you going to impact them? How about what we saw in NAZI Germany when you're in perhaps one of those camps? You could impact and try to keep them up in the darkest of times. And there were people like that, shining examples of people who would face adversity to the very end and not give in to the darkness and would just do their best to keep lifting up humanity. We are most definitely in a spiritual war, and it's been ongoing as long as we know. I mean, honestly, who knows how deep and how long this battle has been going on. We've talked about the yugas and how we go from golden age to a silver age on the descending cycle, and then to a bronze, and then to a dark age. And then again, we start the ascending cycle that leads us out of that dark age, eventually back to a golden age. And the influences that we are around are tremendously different depending on what cycle of the yuga we are in.
Well, we have to look at these things from this angle. For evil to get a foothold and for evil to get ahead, it takes for a lot of good men to say nothing. And right now we're in a situation where we can say something, and we need to keep that in mind.
We still can speak. It might be much more difficult, and there might be a lot of venues where you can't speak directly anymore. But what does that show you? It gives you an idea of who exactly it is that is battling for the darkness and who is battling against the darkness. And, there's a biblical phrase that basically says Satan himself might come as an angel of light. And that's often used to try to make anybody that goes against exactly what's written in the Bible suspicious of anybody that's not, quoting something exactly biblical. But we should be suspicious of everything, because again, who controls this world? Well, it's the adversary to humanity, the adversary to the light. The darkness controls this world at this time. Their time is short. That is why they are doing what they are doing. And those that are awake, you can see that clear as day. Clear as day. And then there are some that are awake that maybe could see it, acknowledge it.
It's really difficult. It's honestly a tug of war for the human heart to step up and recognize some of these things that have happened, that are happening. It's, up to each and every one of us to decide where are we going to stand right now. What are we going to do?
I just wanted to go over a little bit of history that maybe people don't know. Cambodia, the Khmer Rouge, lasted 4 years. Between 1975 and 1979, this Cambodian genocide was an explosion of mass violence that saw between 1.5 and 3 million people killed at the hands of a leadership group. 1.5 to 3 million people lost their lives between 75 and 79 brutally. It was a genocide. This is not unique in our history. Rwanda, there was 100 days of slaughter. 800,000 people lost their lives. 800,000 people lost their lives. It's a massive number. It's incredible. And the brutality that was exhibited was truly what we could call demonic. And when we've let the cat out of the bag, and many people have realized that there are entities that are not human that feed off of misery. They feed off of this type of energy. This type of energy creates a massive food source for certain entities. And when we look at the true structure of power that lies upon the globe, we see that those that are really in a position of power understand this. And yeah, so much of that, those myths, those legends and things about, selling your soul to the devil and black magic and everything. Again, that's something that for many people is unthinkable, that it's actually real. But it is real, so to speak. It is very real. And then when we look to, other countries, like when Stalin took over in Russia, and the family of the Tsar was killed, and they had the communist revolution there. The genocide that was tragically aimed at Ukraine and killed millions again in the 30s. Starvation. It was politically motivated, and it's just sad, and it's beyond comprehension. And when we look to China, and how about Mao? Who was the biggest mass murderer in the history of the world? Most people probably assume it's Hitler. And some others might guess Stalin, but both of them were outdone by Mao Zedong. From 58 to 62, his great leap forward policy led to the deaths of up to 45 million people. Incredible what we see going on. Who is really behind these movements? Proportions. Who really is behind all this? Is it just simple human greed? Or is it human greed and all the dark emotions that humans are capable of that are being manipulated by other forces?
Well, these dark emotions are created for a different level of entity, and it's unfortunately very symbiotic to the beings on the third dimension, creating circumstances for beings on the fourth dimension to feed.
And what if there were human beings other than these human beings that get the credit for all these atrocities, that were really manipulating things behind the scenes, creating all this, one after another, at the, behest and request, perhaps, of their actual overlords. There's no other way to really kind of word it. When you see what was happening over there, there were all sorts of rumors. There was so much infighting. between the National Socialists and the Communists in Germany, and in fact there was massive arson fires, that were lit, and book burnings and attacks on, one against the other. And, it was a case where people were very divided. They were totally divided. They were divided into two camps. And again, we go back to the Tower of Babel, with the powerful ones basically saying, hey, look, humanity's united. We cannot have that. Let us divide them. Let's get them fighting each other constantly. They'll police themselves. There were those people that welcomed Hitler's army in, just open arms.
As heroes.
Yeah, and there's so many people in denial. And then you get used to, in time, seeing a military presence everywhere. When in reality, in like a golden age, we're not going to see a military presence anywhere.
Mm-mm.
And again, we've said, even in these times when you talk about the Galactic Federation, there's so much disinfo out there. There's some that basically paint it as a military organization, like it's fighting battles right now. It's a spiritual organization. It's not a military organization. And again, the Great Divide continues as we are exposed to more and more truths that there are entities like the Galactic Fed out there. But most definitely, they're not taking up arms. They're all about taking up vibrations.
Yes, guiding us in our evolution.
And we see the youth that, we're just so eager to go off and fight these wars because they're brainwashed. They're conditioned.
They feel they're following their heart. They feel they're following their very best service to humanity. And that's the scary part, is that they believe in their hearts, minds, souls, with every cell in their body, that they are absolutely doing the best thing for humanity.
And the traumatic conditioning that people receive that makes them able to do things that are ultimately unjustifiable, but they'll find a way of rationalizing. Again, look to the Inquisition, look to the witch hunts, look to what happened to the Cathars, look what happened to the Knights Templar, look what happened to one group after another, the Gnostics. Persecution after persecution after persecution, rationalization after rationalization after rationalization, radicalization after radicalization after radicalization. It goes on today.
People become extremely desensitized to things that they really shouldn't be desensitized to. Certain things become a normality in their life, and it becomes a shoulder shrug, and that's something that we really need to guard against in this time.
After it came out just how bad the atrocities were in Germany and throughout the German-occupied territories, it was mind-blowing for many people. And so we had the Nuremberg trials, and we had the Nuremberg Code that came out when it was uncovered that people like Dr. Mengele was doing all sorts of experiments on people in these camps. And interesting, that genetic experimentation, because they get that from above. They're taught that from above, so to speak. If you guys understand, when you look to the abduction phenomenon and you see what's always there at the center of the abduction phenomenon, it's all about genetic experimentation. This is always going on this planet in dark ages. It's just part of it. So, part of what came out was the fact that when it comes to any sort of research, no force, fraud, deceit, duress, overreaching, or other ulterior form of constraint or coercion should be used by any sort of entity, any sort of policing entity, any sort of authority. And in the Nuremberg trials, as you're looking there at Hermann Goering, who was named to be Hitler's successor, he was the head of the Air Force, the Luftwaffe. He ended up committing suicide, or at least that's what we were told right before the hangings of the ones that were found guilty occurred. And of course, Himmler, who was really the brains behind so much of it, as well as Hitler, were supposed to have committed suicide. Supposed to have committed suicide, because of course there's many references to him being in South America, perhaps in Antarctica as well, perhaps on Mars. Perhaps there's all sorts of clones out there as well. But the crimes against humanity that became just so obvious was staggering. And again, it was thinking the unthinkable for so many. And that's something we should not forget, because, you know, it most definitely could happen again. Especially if we are so divided and we don't reach people to truly get them to understand what is really, you know, going on around us all the time as we look to these different events from Rwanda and Cambodia, Russia and China, and of course, you know, World War II with the Nazis. And we see the secret history of the Underground Railroad. You know, there was always those people that knew that, say for instance, slavery is always wrong. It's always wrong. I mean, how can you justify slavery? It's unjustifiable. And yet, you know, when we look to the founding fathers, you know, there was actually a pretty good deal of them, from what I've read, you know, about half, at least half, had slaves. And, you know, here they are talking about inalienable rights and freedom, but somehow they still couldn't see what was right in front of their faces.
You know, we have to look at things right now, and we do have to find the silver lining. We do have to find the good in everything. And I think right now the silver lining is our ability to educate ourselves right now. I don't feel that a lot of these folks back then had the ability to see the hindsight and the foresight the way we can see it now. They just had a lot of personal, really horrible stories which guided them through their life into finding some type of freedom or some type of way out of that situation. So I do feel we're blessed in the sense that we do have forewarning and we do have hindsight.
Well, and the point I want to make is that there's people that knew that they would get in big trouble, if not have their lives potentially be risked, but they would still take it for others, to try to help others, because it was just simply the right thing to do. And, you know, there was the death penalty for aiding certain groups there that were under Nazi German rule, and still they did it, because it was just simply the right thing to do. And the right thing to do for us is always to share what we know, to share the truth that we have experienced ourselves and that we know deep inside. You know, Buddha had said, don't believe something because I tell you. He said, don't believe something because your parents told you, or your teacher, or the king, or any person in any type of authority. You got to judge it with your heart and your head and feel what's right. Learn how to develop that sensing, that inner knowing. It's so critical in this time to develop true discernment past all the propaganda that's always out there trying to justify the unthinkable.
Right. I mean, those energies can cut through BS like a hot knife through butter. They really can, but they need to be developed.
So we want to send our prayers and best wishes to everybody that's lost loved ones recently, because it's a lot. And I was just reading from a few different sources, it seems like an unthinkable amount of people right now that are losing loved ones. And again, share what you know, share what you've experienced. Don't bury your truth. Stand fast and stand true to what you know is right.
Now's the time.
Yes. Thank you for your support on Ko-Fi and Patreon. As always, God bless and namaste.
Namaste.